The Stargazer hangs in the void above a dead world. Its sensors paint a picture of utter desolation, a graveyard of a planet scoured clean by time. But then a flicker appears, an energy signature that defies all natural explanation. Commander Elara Vance leans close to her screen, her voice dropping to a whisper. That is not natural decay, that is a pattern. A shiver of pure discovery runs through the crew. They have found a perfectly geometric ruin on a world declared lifeless for millennia, a discovery that promises to shatter everything they know about their own past. By the end of this story, you will uncover the terrifying truth of what happened to humanity's cradle and the cosmic warning it left behind. What secret could be so dangerous it had to be buried with an entire world? What does it mean for our future among the stars? How do you prepare for a truth that could rewrite your entire history? The shuttle settled into the fine, glittering dust with a final, soft hiss. Outside, a valley of shattered crystal stretched beneath a pale, dead sky, the fragments catching the weak light of a dying star. Dr. Aris Thorne was the first to step onto the surface, his boots crunching on the strange terrain. He knelt immediately, his gloved hand brushing away millennia of accumulated grime. Beneath the gray powder was a surface of impossible smoothness, a deep, unreflective black. His voice, when it came over the comms, was a trembling whisper that carried the weight of a paradigm shifting. This is not rock, this is pavement. A ripple of stunned silence was followed by a flurry of activity as the rest of the science team fanned out, their handheld sensors whirring to life. The initial data streams confirmed the geologists' declaration with cold, hard facts. They were not just standing on an ancient geological formation. They were standing in the ruins of a city. The smooth black surface extended in fractured but unmistakably straight lines forming the ghost of a grid. Here and there, strange, melted stumps of metal protruded from the ground, all that remained of structures that must have once scraped the sky. The air was still and utterly silent, a silence that felt heavy with the echoes of countless lost voices. What kind of civilization built their roads to last for eons? And what unimaginable force could have reduced their towering achievements to this field of crystal dust and forgotten foundations? A sharp clang echoed through Kalen's suit, the sound alien in the pervasive silence. He looked down, his boot having kicked against something solid hidden beneath the dust. He knelt, digging his gloved fingers into the fine powder until they closed around a small, cool, rectangular object. He held it up, wiping the grime of ages from its surface with his thumb. The tarnish gave way to a sleek metallic sheen, and then a symbol, a familiar, stylized fruit with a single bite taken from its side, his breath caught in his throat. He held up the artifact for the others to see, his voice a mix of confusion and awe. "I found something." The team's tech officer, Rin, was at his side in moments, taking the object with reverent hands. She produced a portable reader, its interface glowing softly in the dim light. She carefully brushed a contact point clean and connected a fine wire. The device hummed to life. "It is a data storage device, I think," she murmured, her eyes scanning the scrolling data on her screen. "The file structure is primitive but surprisingly complex. There is one file here, easily accessible. Its label is logo_Apple. A wave of disorienting recognition, cold and profound, washed over the entire team. This was not some abstract alien hieroglyph. This was a corporate logo from Earth's ancient history, a symbol of technology and commerce from a world that was, by all galactic records, a myth. They were not just holding a piece of a lost civilization. They were holding a piece of their own home, a relic from a past so distant it had faded into legend. The silence that followed was heavier than before, now filled with the ghost of a world called Earth. What other mundane pieces of a forgotten daily life were buried here, waiting to tell their story? The silence was broken only by the crunch of their boots as they pressed deeper into the skeletal remains of the city. The glittering dust gave way to a vast, open plaza, and at its center stood the only structure that had resisted total annihilation. A massive obelisk, its sides scarred and pitted by eons of erosion, reached like a broken finger towards the ashen sky. Its surface was a tapestry of weathered figures, human forms locked in poses of creation and community, their details softened by the relentless passage of time. Dr. Anya Sharma, the team's linguist, approached the monolith with a sense of sacred dread. She ran a gloved hand over the stone, feeling the ghost of its carvings. "This is a record," she whispered. She signaled for her equipment, and Rin brought forward a bulky spectral imager, its humming emitter washing the obelisk's base in waves of shifting light. The device painstakingly peeled back the layers of decay, reconstructing the original inscriptions that had been worn away to near invisibility. Anya's eyes scanned the newly revealed text, her lips moving silently as she passed the angular script. Then her body went rigid. A soft, choked sound escaped her. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was thin and fractured with emotion. She read the words aloud, each one a hammer blow to the crew's understanding of reality. "Here on the third planet from the star Sol, humanity made its stand. We remember Earth." The translation hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. The crystal dust beneath their feet, the melted stumps of metal, the corporate logo on a data chip, it all snapped into a horrifying, heartbreaking focus. This was not just any dead world. This was the cradle, the birthplace of their entire species. The legendary Earth was not a myth. It was a graveyard, and they were standing on it. How do you process the death of your own origin story? How do you mourn a world you never knew was real? The discovery of the obelisk's message left the crew standing in a silence that was heavier than the planet's thin atmosphere. They were not archaeologists on an alien world. They were children standing at their own forgotten graveside. Dr. Thorne was the first to move, his scientific instincts cutting through the grief. "The power source," he said, his voice rough, "that initial energy signature we detected. It has to be more than just a ruin. It has to be a source." He pointed towards a massive, half-buried structure at the far end of the plaza, its shape suggesting a fortified bunker or a vault. The team moved as one, their earlier caution replaced by a desperate, driving need for answers. They found a sealed portal, its surface seamless except for a single, dark interface panel. Rin worked quickly, running a heavy cable from their shuttle's power cell to the ancient terminal. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep, resonant hum vibrated through the soles of their boots. A network of faint blue lines ignited across the portal, converging on the center as the massive door slid aside with a groan of protest from mechanisms that had been still for millennia. Inside, the air was perfectly preserved, and in the center of the cavernous room, a single crystalline data core sat dormant on a pedestal. As their shuttle's power flooded into it, the core began to glow with a soft, internal light. A holographic projector flickered above it, unstable at first, then resolving into a crisp, rotating map of a star system. A yellow star sat at its center, with a series of planets orbiting in familiar patterns. The third planet, a vibrant blue and green marble, was highlighted. A voice, calm and synthesized, yet imbued with a profound, eternal sadness, filled the chamber. "Final entry, Terran Archive." The voice paused as if gathering digital thought. "The Exodus fleet has departed the Sol system with the last of our kind. Our legacy is not one of conquest but of consequence. The great filter, the theoretical barrier that prevents civilizations from reaching the stars, was not an external threat. It was our own success. We consumed our world to reach the stars." The crew stood frozen, listening as the log detailed a history of brilliant advancement and catastrophic short-sightedness. It spoke of an age where humanity mastered fusion power and material science, building great arcs to sail the void. but the energy and resources required were titanic, strip mining the planet on a scale that shattered its biosphere. The atmosphere grew thin, the oceans acidified, and the very crust of the world was destabilized in the frantic race to escape the dying cradle. They did not fall to war or plague. They worked their world to death for a ticket to a new one. The holographic map shifted, showing the blue-green world turning a sickly brown, then gray, its light going out. The voice fell silent. The crew was left alone in the humming archive, the ghost of a self-inflicted apocalypse hanging in the air around them. They had come looking for answers about who they were, and they found a warning about what they could become. That silence in the archive was shattered by a frantic priority alert from the Stargazer. Commander Vance's calm link crackled to life, the voice of her communications officer strained with urgency. "Commander, you need to hear this. We are detecting a new signal, faint but clear. It is originating from the planetary moon." On the Stargazer's bridge, the officer stared at his console, watching a single, rhythmic pulse of data translate into a simple, terrifying sequence on his screen. "It is a beacon," he confirmed, his voice dropping to a hushed tone, "but it is not a distress call. The signal is a countdown." The crew on the surface gathered around the live feed, the serene sadness of the archive instantly replaced by a cold, gripping tension. The signal pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a digital heartbeat from a dead moon. Each pulse subtracted one digit from a number so immense it was difficult to comprehend. It had been dormant, silent for millennia, until their shuttle landed and their power coursed through the archive. They had not merely awakened a record of the past. They had tripped a wire. This was not a memorial, it was a monitor, and their arrival had been registered as an event. The finality of the archive's message now took on a new, active menace. What system, built with the same desperate ingenuity that fueled the Exodus, was still ticking away in the lunar darkness, and what happens when the countdown after all this time finally reaches zero? The debate aboard the Stargazer was a storm of clashing convictions. "This is a graveyard, not a library," Dr. Thorne insisted, his voice strained. "We have desecrated it enough by waking its ghost. We should leave it in peace." Commander Vance stood firm, her hands braced on the command console. "That countdown is not a ghost, Aris, it is a message. Our ancestors, with their last breath, built a system that waited for this exact moment. They left a final testament, and we have a duty to receive it. To turn away now would be the true desecration." The air in the command center grew thick with the weight of the choice. They were arguing over the wishes of the dead, a people they had only just learned were their own. The risk was incalculable, but the potential cost of ignorance felt greater. Vance's gaze swept across her senior staff, seeing the fear warring with a desperate, shared need for closure. The decision was made. A small team would take a shuttle to the source of the signal. They would go to the dead world's moon and learn what the last humans had so desperately needed to say. It was a risk born from the deepest kind of loyalty, a need to honor a legacy by facing its final, ticking secret. What final instruction or final warning could possibly demand such an eternal vigil? The Peregrine slid away from the Stargazer like a splinter of shadow, its engines a whisper in the void as it angled toward the dead world's moon. The journey was short and silent, the crew inside wrapped in their own thoughts, watching the gray, cratered sphere grow from a distant disk to a desolate landscape of profound emptiness. Then, as their navigation locked onto the source of the pulsing signal, the moon's surface itself seemed to stir. A section of a massive, ancient mountain range shifted. A perfectly circular section of rock and regolith erized open without a sound, revealing not a dark cave, but a brightly lit cavernous hangar bay that hummed with latent power. It was a mouth of light opened in the face of the dead moon. Kalen's hands were steady on the controls, but his voice was a murmur of awe and apprehension. "It is inviting us in." He guided the small shuttle through the monumental doorway, which began to silently close behind them, sealing them inside. the transition was absolute. One moment they were in the star-dusted blackness of space, and the next they were settling onto the deck of a pristine, alien, yet eerily familiar facility, the hangar's atmospheric field shimmering as it stabilized around them. The air that filled the cabin was cool and sterile like a hospital, but carried the faint, metallic scent of ancient, functioning machinery. They were not in a tomb. They were in a place that had been waiting patiently for millennia. Who or what had been keeping the lights on? The air inside the lunar facility was unnervingly still, a perfect, sterile silence that had been maintained for eons. Their footsteps echoed in the vast, brightly lit corridor, a sound that felt like an intrusion. The walls were not bare rock, but a seamless, polished material, and they were lined with inactive holographic panels. As the team moved deeper into the heart of the complex, their presence seemed to act as a trigger. One by one, the panels flickered to life around them, filling the hall with silent, moving images. To their left, a hologram showed cities of impossible grace, towers of glass and light reaching for a blue sky, bustling with life and movement. To their right, another panel displayed the same cities wreathed in smoke, the skies turning a sickly orange, the land cracking into barren deserts. It was a visceral, heartbreaking timeline of glory and decay, a condensed history of a world's self-inflicted death playing out on an endless, silent loop. They were walking through a museum of their own genesis and apocalypse. The final panel at the corridor's end showed a fleet of colossal arcs like silver seeds, launching from a dying, brown world into the blackness of space. The image held for a moment, then faded, leaving them standing before a massive, circular door. It slid open without a sound. The chamber beyond stole the breath from their lungs. It was a cathedral of memory. The room was vast and circular, and in its center stood a single, minimalist console, but it was the walls that commanded their awestruck attention. From floor to ceiling, in perfectly ordered rows, were thousands upon thousands of crystalline data rods. Each one glowed with a soft, internal light like a captive star. They were beautiful and terrifying in their multitude. Kalen approached the central console. Its surface was clean, with only a few tactile interfaces and a single line of text etched into its surface. He read the words aloud, his voice hushed with reverence: genetic and cultural legacy, species survival protocol alpha. The meaning settled over them, heavy and profound. This was not a tomb marking an end. It was a time capsule of unimaginable scale, a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of time. Their ancestors had not just fled their dying world. They had painstakingly preserved its essence, every song, every story, every strand of DNA, and hidden it here in the darkness of their moon. They had built this vault not for themselves, but for the children who would one day forget their way home. They had gambled that their descendants would be curious enough and brave enough to find it. What incredible treasures and terrible responsibilities were locked away in those thousands of glowing crystals. Kalen's hand hovered over the console's central interface. The smooth, cool surface lit up beneath his touch, a web of light spreading from his fingertips. For a single, breathless moment, the only sound was the low hum of the vault itself. Then, a deep, resonant tone pulsed through the chamber, a sound that felt less like a noise and more like a physical wave passing through them. All around the circular room, sections of the wall they had assumed were merely decorative began to shift. Panels retracted with a soft, hydraulic sigh, revealing row upon row of what could only be described as stasis pods, their surfaces frosted over but glowing with a soft, blue internal light. The hum intensified, climbing in pitch and volume, becoming the sound of a machine stirring from a million-year slumber. One pod directly opposite the console suddenly hissed, a jet of white vapor bursting from its seam. The thick, transparent cover slid back silently into the wall. Inside, shrouded in the dissipating cryofog, was a human form clad in a sleek, silver preservation suit. A gauntleted hand twitched, then rose shakily to the helmet's release. There was a click and the helmet retracted, folding back into the suit's collar. The face revealed was pale, etched with the deep lines of time held in suspension, but the eyes that opened were sharp, desperately focusing on the stunned crew. A voice, thin and cracked from disuse, yet clear as a bell, crackled over their open comm channel. "Identify yourselves." The figure's gaze swept over their modern suits, their unfamiliar equipment, a flicker of profound hope in their ancient eyes. "Are you the children of the Exodus?" The question hung in the sterile air, a query that spanned the gulf of ages. They were not just discovering a legacy of data. They were speaking to it. The last guardian of a dead world had just asked them if they were home. The name fell into the silence like a stone into a still pond. Dr. Elara Vance, the chief archivist of the Legacy Project. The crew stood frozen, their instruments forgotten, their scientific detachment shattered by the living, breathing echo of the world they had just mourned. His eyes, though sharp with a rekindled intelligence, held a sadness so deep it seemed etched into his very soul. "We knew," he continued, his voice gaining a fragile strength, "that some would return. The path to the stars is long, and memories fade into legends. We stayed behind, a handful of us, to be the guides for the children who lost their way home." The confession was staggering. The Exodus was not a clean, triumphant departure. It was a desperate, last-ditch gamble to save the species, a flight into the unknown with no guarantee of success. The people on those ships carried the hope of humanity, but they left carrying only fragments of the whole story, the edited, sanitized version meant to fuel a new beginning. He gestured slowly, his arm encompassing the entire humming vault, the thousands of glowing data rods, the silent stasis pods. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, "was our insurance policy. It is the unedited truth, the complete record of our rise, our brilliance, our pride, and our catastrophic fall. We buried the knowledge of how we died here in the heart of our dead moon so that you, our heirs, would not have to repeat our mistake." The true weight of the Legacy Project settled upon them. It was not merely a museum or a time capsule. It was a vaccine, a carefully preserved dose of the terrible, terminal illness that had killed a world, kept safe so that future generations could study it, understand its cause, and build an immunity against it. The final, selfless act of a dying civilization was not to hide their shame, but to weaponize their failure into a lesson for eternity. What kind of courage does it take to stay behind on a dying world, not to die with it, but to become a permanent monument to its greatest failure? Dr. Vance's ancient hand trembled as he gestured for them to follow him deeper into the vault. He led them away from the glowing data rods and the humming stasis pods toward a recess in the wall they had not noticed. A section of the seamless material slid back without a sound, revealing a small, stark chamber. It was utterly empty, save for a single pedestal in its center. And on that pedestal rested an object that defied simple description. It was a perfect cube about the size of a human skull, made of a material so profoundly dark it seemed to be a hole cut in reality itself. It did not reflect light. It consumed it, casting no shadow and offering no sheen, a void given geometric form. "This is the catalyst," Dr. Vance said, his voice heavy with a grief that had lasted millennia. "It is not of Earth." His words hung in the sterile air, recontextualizing everything. Our golden age of discovery, our leap to the stars, it was not solely our own brilliance. "We found this adrift in the void, a gift," they said, "or a test." He explained that the artifact was a power source of unimaginable efficiency, a key to clean, limitless energy that unlocked technologies they had only dreamed of. It allowed them to build the arcs, to power the engines that could cross the interstellar gulfs. But it had a price, one they did not understand until it was far too late. The catalyst did not create energy, it transmuted it. It fed on the complex, vibrant energy of a living world. It slowly, inexorably devoured the planetary biosphere itself. "We thought we were harnessing a star," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the dark cube. but we were feeding our world to a silent, patient mouth. Every watt of power that built our great cities, every jewel that launched our ships, was paid for with a piece of Earth's living soul. Our atmosphere thinned because the catalyst was breathing it in. Our oceans died because it was drinking them. Our greatness, our triumphant exodus, was our downfall, triggered by a promise we were too desperate to question. The crew stared at the artifact, this silent engine of apocalypse. It was the answer to the how, the terrible, elegant mechanism behind the planet's death. Humanity had not merely been reckless, they had been tricked by a cosmos that offered a shortcut, a deal with a devil they never saw coming. What does it mean that our species' greatest achievements were built on a foundation of planetary murder? And if this was a test from an older civilization, did we pass by leaving, or did we fail the moment we accepted the gift? The dark cube consumed the light and the hope in the room. Dr. Vance's explanation hung between them, a verdict from the past. The humming of the vault was no longer the sound of preservation, but the sound of a clock ticking down to a final, terrible judgment. He gestured to a new panel that had illuminated on the central console. A sequence of numbers glowed with a soft, ominous red light. The countdown, it was not a welcome. It was the catalyst's own failsafe, he explained, his voice stripped of all emotion. A final security measure. The beacon was not meant to guide you, it was meant to evaluate you. If a non-human species, a predator, had stumbled upon this vault and triggered the system, the countdown would have concluded with a detonation powerful enough to vaporize this moon and every secret it contained. The crew stood in stunned silence, the magnitude of the safeguard rendering them speechless. It was a planetary-scale dead man's switch, a bomb built to protect the galaxy from repeated catastrophe. "But you are human," Vance continued, his ancient eyes searching their faces. "The signal has authenticated your genetic signature. You have passed the first test. But there is a second." He pointed to two distinct interfaces that now glowed on the console. One pulsed with a steady, calming blue light. The other shimmered with the same urgent red as the countdown. "You can reset the countdown," he said softly. "By doing so, you declare yourselves worthy. You accept the legacy, the truth, the terrible knowledge of the catalyst, and you take on the burden of ensuring this history is never repeated. You become the custodians we prayed would evolve." His hand then moved to the red interface. "Or you can let the countdown finish. The system will interpret your inaction as a verdict. It will conclude that humanity remains a risk, that the temptation of the catalyst is still too great. It will detonate, erasing this facility, the archive, the catalyst, and us from existence forever. The choice is yours." The weight that settled on them was physical, a pressure that seemed to bow their shoulders. They were not just a crew of explorers anymore. They were a jury for their entire species, handed a gavel by their own ancestors. To choose the blue was to accept a poisoned inheritance, to carry the knowledge of a weapon that could doom any world they settled. To choose the red was to commit an act of ultimate self-erasure, to willfully become orphans again, forever ignorant of their own deepest flaw. It was a choice between a dangerous truth and a peaceful lie, between the burden of memory and the freedom of forgetfulness. The fate of their past and the course of their future rested on a single, silent decision made in a room at the heart of a dead moon. The silence in the vault was no longer reverent but charged with a terrible, splitting tension. The weight of the choice did not unite them, it fractured them. Dr. Aris Thorne was the first to break, his voice a raw, desperate plea. "We cannot take this risk. We are not gods. Look at what it did to them, the architects of our own species. They thought they could control it too." His hand trembled as he pointed at the dark cube. "That thing is a planetary parasite. Its very existence is a threat to any world we might call home. To preserve it is to preserve the weapon that murdered Earth. We have a moral duty to let the countdown finish, to erase this temptation forever." Commander Elara Vance stood her ground, her face a mask of grim resolve. And what then, Aris? We bury our heads in the sand and pretend we never learned why our cradle is a graveyard. That is not duty, that is fear. She swept her gaze across the crew, her voice lowering but gaining intensity. This is not just power, it is knowledge, the ultimate knowledge of cause and effect. Our ancestors gave us the one thing they lacked, a complete understanding of the price. With that understanding, we can study it. We can learn to recognize its like, or even find a way to neutralize its threat. To destroy it is to guarantee we will be blindsided by the next cosmic test. The debate erupted around them, no longer a discussion but a schism. Rin, the tech officer, sided with Thorn, her voice tight with anxiety. Commander, the failsafe itself is a judgment. It was built by the people who understood the catalyst's true nature best. They gave us the option to destroy it for a reason. They knew we might not be strong enough to resist. Kalen, however, moved to stand beside Vance, but they also gave us the option to keep it. They trusted us to make the right choice, not the easy one. Erasing this history doesn't make us safer. It just makes us ignorant, and ignorance is what doomed them. The standoff was absolute. They were no longer a crew, but two factions representing the fundamental conflict of their species: curiosity versus caution, ambition versus humility, all distilled into this single, ticking moment in a silent vault. The red and blue lights on the console pulsed, waiting. The fate of Earth's memory and humanity's future balanced on a knife's edge with the last archivist, Dr. Vance, watching the descendants of his people tear themselves apart over the very legacy he had sacrificed everything to protect. Kalen's breath hitched as he stared at the dark cube. While the others argued, a single, reckless thought had taken root in his mind. What if they were all wrong? What if the catalyst was not just a warning but a key? A key to power on a scale they could not yet conceive. While Commander Vance and Dr. Thorn were locked in their ideological war, he saw an opening. His fingers, shielded from the others' view by his own body, danced across a secondary panel he had discreetly accessed on the console. He was not trying to choose blue or red. He was trying to peel back the layers to see the source code of the artifact itself, to understand its mechanics before anyone could make a decision to destroy it. A flicker of data streamed across his private wrist display. For one triumphant second, he thought he had bypassed the primary lockout. Then the world dissolved into light and sound. A shrill, piercing siren ripped through the vault, drowning out all argument. The console he was tampering with flashed a violent crimson, and the words "unauthorized access, quarantine protocol engaged" scrolled across every screen in the chamber. From recesses in the walls they had not even noticed, panels slid open. Silhouettes unfolded from the darkness, rising to their full height with a synchronized hydraulic hiss. They were tall, skeletal, and forged from the same unreflective black material as the cube. Their faceless heads swiveled as one, red optical sensors igniting and locking onto Kalen's position. The robotic sentinels took a single, unified step forward, their purpose as cold and clear as the void outside. They were not here to debate or judge. Their programming was simple, final, and utterly merciless. Eliminate the threat to the vault. The theoretical debate was over. The immediate fight for survival had just begun. The shriek of plasma fire echoed off the polished walls. One of the skeletal sentinels staggered back, its chassis scorched, but two more stepped forward to take its place, their red eyes unwavering. "Fall back now." Commander Vance's voice was a whip crack of command, her sidearms spitting controlled bursts to cover their retreat. Dr. Elara Vance moved with a surprising, desperate agility, his ancient limbs fueled by a lifetime of waiting for this exact catastrophe. He pointed a trembling finger down a side corridor. "This way. It is a maintenance conduit. The sentinels will not use it. They cannot fit." They scrambled into the narrow, dimly lit passage, the sounds of relentless mechanical pursuit muted behind them. Vance's breath came in ragged gasps as he ran. "You do not understand," he wheezed, his voice filled with a terror that transcended the immediate fight. "The Sentinels are just the first wave, a local security response." He glanced back, his ancient eyes wide. "The main defense system, the one linked to the countdown, it is not designed to capture intruders. It is designed to sterilize the site. If the countdown reaches 0, or if the system judges the threat uncontainable, it will scuttle the entire complex. It will turn this moon into a cloud of expanding dust." The words propelled them forward with a new, primal urgency. The countdown was no longer an abstract choice between truth and oblivion. It was a literal fuse burning toward a bomb. They burst out of the conduit and back into the main hangar bay, the sleek form of the Peregrine, a beautiful, distant sight across the vast deck. The hangar was no longer silent. A new, deeper, throbbing hum had joined the chaos, a vibration they could feel in their bones. From the ceiling, massive, articulated arms began to unfold, their tips glowing with the same malevolent red as the sentinel eyes. The main defense was awakening. "Run!" Elara's shout was swallowed by the escalating din. They sprinted across the open space, dodging as a laser beam lanced down from above, carving a molten line in the deck just meters from Kalen. He was the first to hit the Peregrine's ramp, slamming his palm on the access panel. The others piled in behind him, Dr. Vance all but carried by Rin and Thorn. The moment the last boot cleared the threshold, Kalen hit the seal, the ramp hissing shut. He didn't wait for the all clear. He was already strapping into the pilot's seat, his hands a blur across the controls. The engines whined to life, a protesting scream against the hangar's artificial gravity. On the main console, the external feed showed the hangar doors still sealed, the massive red arms now taking aim. Then a new alert flashed, critical and blinding. The countdown timer, which had been a steady, ominous number, was now blinking a frantic, urgent red. The numbers were dropping faster, accelerating toward their final, fiery conclusion. The system had made its judgment. They were out of time. The complex was preparing to eat itself and them with it. Could they outrun a blast designed to erase a moon, or had their quest for answers finally trapped them in a tomb of their own making? The Peregrine's engines screamed against the hangar's artificial gravity, a desperate animal fighting its leash. Through the cockpit canopy, Kalen saw the massive red arms on the ceiling swivel, their targeting lasers painting the shuttle's hull. "We are not going to make it." The thought was cold and absolute. Then a figure moved in his peripheral vision. Dr. Elara Vance was not running for the ramp. He was stumbling toward a recessed control panel beside the monumental hangar door, his movements fueled by a final, decisive purpose. His voice, thin but clear, crackled over the comms. "Go. My purpose is fulfilled. I have passed on the warning." His hands flew across the panel, inputting a manual override sequence. "Now I ensure you escape it." With a final, resonant clang, the inner blast door began to grind shut, a slab of ancient alloy descending from the ceiling. It sealed Dr. Vance inside the hangar, trapping him with the advancing sentinels and the glowing, murderous arms. The last thing they saw was his face, turned toward them, not with fear, but with a profound, calm resolve. It was the look of a man who had waited 10,000 years to complete his final duty. The sacrifice bought them the one thing they needed: time. Released from the gravity field, the Peregrine shot forward like a bullet from a gun, screaming through the narrowing gap of the still opening outer door and into the welcoming blackness of space. Behind them, the moon hung silent for one more heartbeat. Then it tore itself apart. A light without sound erupted from its surface, a silent, expanding sphere of pure white fury that consumed the entire lunar mass, turning rock and memory and sacrifice into an ephemeral, glittering cloud. The shockwave hit the Peregrine moments later, a physical blow that sent the small ship tumbling through the void. Inside, the crew was silent, strapped into their seats, watching the aftermath of a star being born from a grave. The last living witness to Earth was gone, and he had taken the catalyst with him. The choice had been made for them. The past was now truly dead, but its warning, its terrible, beautiful, and costly lesson was now theirs to carry forward. How do you honor a sacrifice that spans millennia? You remember it, you learn from it, and you make absolutely certain it was not in vain. The expanding cloud of vaporized moon dust glittered against the blackness, a beautiful, terrible monument to a sacrifice 10,000 years in the making. Inside the peregrine, the silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the low hum of life support and the ragged sound of their own breathing. They had the data. The complete, unedited archive of Earth now resided in their shuttle's core, a treasure more burdensome than any they could have imagined. But the cost of that knowledge hung in the air around them, the ghost of Dr. Vance's final, pleading command, "Remember us, be better." The words were not a suggestion, they were a charge, a solemn duty passed from a dead world to its wandering children. How do you carry the memory of a graveyard? How do you build a future when your very origin is a cautionary tale of self-destruction? Back aboard the Stargazer, the mood was somber. The initial thrill of discovery had curdled into a profound and complicated grief. They had gone looking for answers about an alien world and had instead held a mirror up to their own souls, seeing a reflection of ambition and fallibility that stretched back to the dawn of their species. The raw data from the main archive was a torrent of information, a fire hose of history. It contained everything, the symphonies and the screams, the blueprints for fusion reactors, and the environmental impact reports that were ignored, the private journals of the last groundside engineers, and the launch manifests of the Exodus fleet. It was the story of humanity, uncensored and unvarnished. To study it was to inherit every triumph and every failure, to feel the weight of every bad decision that led to that final, silent detonation. Commander Elara Vance stood before her senior staff, her face etched with a new kind of resolve. "We are not just explorers anymore," she stated, her voice quiet but firm. "We are curators, we are the keepers of the flame. Our mission has fundamentally changed." The directive was clear. They would not broadcast this discovery to the wider galactic community. The truth of the catalyst was too dangerous, too potent a temptation for any emerging civilization, human or otherwise. Instead, they would become a silent guardian. The Stargazer would carry the archive, and its crew would dedicate themselves to a new, eternal purpose, to analyze the data, to learn its lessons, and to quietly guide their own people away from the same cosmic pitfalls. They would embed the principles of sustainability and foresight into their own culture, not as laws, but as a deeply ingrained instinct, a cultural immune system born from the memory of a world that paid the ultimate price for its progress. This would be their legacy, the true meaning of being better. It would not be a monument of stone or metal, but a living, breathing tradition of vigilance. They would teach their children the story of the blue-green marble not as a myth, but as a memorial, a permanent reminder that the greatest threats often come dressed as gifts, and that the path to the stars must be walked with care, not rushed with desperate hunger. The silent flash that consumed the moon was not an end. It was a beginning, the ignition of a warning beacon that would now burn within them, and their children, and their children's children forever. The message glowed on Commander Vance's screen, its words stark against the star-dusted viewport. She chose each one with the weight of a world upon her, her fingers moving with a deliberate, sober precision. This was not a report, it was a confession and a declaration forged in the silent fire of the lunar detonation. She attached the curated data packets, fragments of the archive that told the most critical parts of the story. The geological core samples showing the planet's rapid, unnatural decay. The energy consumption logs that spiraled into madness alongside the adoption of the catalyst. The final, heartbreaking image of the blue-green marble turning to dust. Her transmission to the Galactic Council was simple, direct, and carried the gravity of a tombstone. "We come from a world that died for its ambition," she wrote, the words echoing the ancient archivist's final lesson. "We carry both its legacy and its warning. We are the children of Earth, and we will not make the same mistake." With a final, decisive tap, she sent it. The data stream shot away from the Stargazer at the speed of light, a capsule of terrible truth hurled into the galactic community. There was no request for aid, no plea for recognition. It was a statement of fact, a line drawn in the sand of cosmic history. They were no longer just another species exploring the void. They were the heirs to a specific, catastrophic failure, and their greatest strength would now be their memory. How would the galaxy react to a species that introduced itself not with boasts of power, but with a record of its own near extinction? The silence on the Stargazer's bridge stretched for weeks, a tense vigil punctuated only by the routine hum of the ship's systems. They had cast their message into the cosmic ocean, a confession of ancestral sin, and now they could only wait to see what manner of judgment would swim back from the depths. When the alert finally chimed, it was not with the blaring urgency of an alarm, but with the soft, insistent tone of a high-priority, encrypted communication. The screen resolved into the image of a being whose form was difficult to comprehend, a shifting silhouette that seemed to be made of solidified light and shadow. Its voice, when it spoke, was not a single sound, but a chorus of whispers translated into a calm, resonant baritone. "We have received your transmission, children of Sol 3. The collective known as the Galactic Council has heard your testimony." Commander Vance stood rigid, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, prepared for condemnation, for exile, for any reaction but the one she received. The envoy continued, its tone not of anger but of a profound, weary wisdom. "The species that possesses the courage to learn from its own extinction event is a rarity in this galaxy. Most who stumble upon such a truth bury it, or worse, seek to replicate the power that caused it. You have chosen to wield your failure as a shield. For this, you are granted probationary status within the galactic community." There were no cheers on the bridge, no sighs of relief. The weight in the room did not lessen, it merely changed shape. They were not being welcomed as equals or celebrated as heroes. They were being acknowledged as survivors of a specific, self-inflicted tragedy, students who had been given a devastatingly expensive textbook. "Your history," the envoy concluded, its form beginning to gently fade from the screen, "is now your greatest teacher. Let it guide your every step." The transmission ended, leaving the crew in a new kind of quiet. They had not been absolved, they had been seen. Their entire identity was now framed by a cataclysm. They were the people who had almost succeeded, who had reached for the stars with one hand while the other held the knife that killed their world. How do you introduce yourself to the universe when your most defining achievement is the scale of your failure, and your only virtue is the fact that you remember it? The Stargazer's new course was not plotted toward uncharted stars, but toward a silent and solemn duty. Its mission parameters were rewritten in the ghostly light of a dead moon, transforming the vessel from a ship of discovery into a floating cenotaph. Every system, every sensor array was now dedicated to a single, somber purpose: to serve as both library and sentinel. The crew became archivists of a lost world, their days spent methodically decrypting and categorizing the vast sea of data from the lunar vault. They did not just study history, they absorbed its echoes, learning to recognize the specific patterns of societal collapse, the warning tremors that preceded a civilization consuming itself. Their work was a perpetual act of remembrance, a vow whispered with every analyzed data stream to never let the silence of Earth fall upon another world. This was not a task that would end in their lifetimes, it was a generational covenant. How do you build a future when your primary purpose is to guard against the ghosts of the past? Their answer was to transform grief into a shield. The archive's data became their most vital tool, a template for identifying what they now called precursor traps, technologies of immense power left behind by vanished races that inevitably led to catastrophe. The catalyst was not a unique anomaly, it was a pattern, a cosmic test that many failed. The Stargazer's long-range scanners were recalibrated to hunt for the specific energy signatures and gravitational anomalies associated with such artifacts. They were no longer simply exploring the galaxy, they were quietly sanitizing it, seeking out these dormant time bombs before another young, ambitious species could stumble upon them and repeat the oldest, deadliest mistake in the cosmos. Their greatest triumph would never be a new discovery, but a disaster forever averted. Is it possible to protect others from a temptation you yourself barely escaped? The crew of the Stargazer had no choice but to try, their ship a solitary beacon of hard-won wisdom in the vast, tempting darkness. The black obelisk rose from the manicured grass of the central plaza, a stark silhouette against the triple moons of their homeworld. It was not grand or ornate, but a perfect, scaled replica of the monument they had found in the dust of a dead cradle. The crew stood before it, their formal attire feeling alien after months in shipsuits as a quiet crowd gathered behind them. There were no speeches, no ceremonial fanfares. The only sound was the whisper of the wind and the hushed murmurs of a people confronting a truth that had been delivered from the grave. Inscribed into the stone's face were the simple, devastating galactic coordinates for a long-dead star system, and beneath them the words that had become their new creed. Here we learn the price of greatness. Let us be wise. It was not a celebration of discovery, but a permanent memorial to a failure. In the weeks that followed, the plaza was never empty. At first, it was the curious and the historians, but soon others came. Engineers on their lunch breaks would sit on the benches nearby, staring at the dark stone. Students on field trips would press their hands against the cool surface, trying to feel a connection to a world they would only ever know as a ghost in a data stream. Parents brought their children and pointed, not to a statue of a conqueror or an inventor, but to a warning. The monument became a silent, communal touchstone for a species that was, for the first time, collectively grappling with the immense responsibility of its own technological power. It asked a question of everyone who visited, a question without a simple answer. How do you build a future that honors the past without being doomed by it? The pilgrimage had begun, not to a site of birth, but to a site of remembrance, ensuring that the silence of Earth would never be forgotten, and more importantly, that it would never be repeated. The silence of the archive had followed Kalen home, a constant, humming accusation in the back of his mind. Every night he saw the flash of the Sentinel's red eyes and the calm, sacrificial resolve on Dr. Vance's face, his moment of reckless curiosity had nearly cost them everything, and that knowledge became a fire that burned away his old ambition, forging a new, unyielding purpose. He did not ask for forgiveness, he asked for the most difficult task available. He submerged himself in the technical schematics and behavioral patterns extracted from the Earth archive, becoming the Stargazer's foremost authority on what they now termed precursor ethics. He was no longer just an engineer, he was a diagnostician for a specific cosmic disease. His personal guilt was the lens through which he examined every new discovery, every anomalous signal. He learned to recognize the subtle tells of a technology that offered too much for too little, the elegant traps designed to appeal to a species' pride and desperation. Where others saw a power source, he saw a potential catalyst. Where they saw a communication device, he saw a possible manipulative influence. His analysis became the first and most critical filter for every artifact the Stargazer encountered. That single moment of weakness in the vault had given him a profound and painful empathy for the temptation such objects represented. He understood the pull, the seductive whisper of easy answers, because he had almost listened to it himself. This deep, personal understanding made him uniquely qualified to build the safeguards, to design the protocols and the educational programs that would inoculate the next generation against the same fatal allure. His greatest failure became his people's most vigilant early warning system. How do you atone for a mistake that spans light years? You spend the rest of your life making sure no one else is ever tempted to make it. The news did not just travel, it detonated across the network of human colonies like a silent, psychological shockwave. The confirmation of Earth was not a triumphant homecoming story, it was a galactic-scale intervention. The curated data packets, the image of the dead world, the story of the catalyst, these were not dry historical facts. They were a ghost story whispered from the cradle of humanity itself, and it fundamentally rewired the collective psyche. From this shared trauma, a new philosophy began to crystallize, born in university halls and public forums. They called it terra somnia, Earth's dream. It was not a call to halt progress, but to redefine it. The dream was not of conquest, but of coexistence, a future where expansion was measured not in light years charted, but in ecosystems preserved. Proponents argued that the only way to truly honor the sacrifice of the cradle was to treat every life-bearing world they encountered with the reverence they now wished they had shown their own. This was not merely an environmental policy, it was a spiritual awakening for a species that had just learned it was born from a graveyard. How do you measure your civilization's worth when your greatest historical lesson is a monument to your own capacity for self-destruction? The answer for a growing number was to measure it by the worlds left untouched, the life allowed to flourish. A quiet revolution was underway, shifting humanity's identity from masters of the galaxy to its most conscientious guardians. Years had softened the lines on Commander Elara Vance's face, but they had not dimmed the quiet fire in her eyes. She stood on the bridge of the Stargazer, watching the vibrant swirls of emerald and sapphire on the world below. It was a living planet, one they had just helped pull back from the brink of a cascading atmospheric collapse. The local civilization had been on the verge of replicating an ancient toxic energy process, a path that felt hauntingly familiar. Her crew had provided the data, the models, the quiet guidance to choose a different road. No demands, no conquest, just a simple, sobering question, asked while sharing the story of a blue-green marble that was no more. She felt the cool, familiar weight of the data chip in her palm, the one that held the entire, unvarnished record of Earth. It was not a heavy burden anymore, not a chain of guilt. It had become something else entirely. She turned to her new first officer, a young woman who had been born after the obelisk was raised on their homeworld. "The ghost of Earth guides us," Elara said, her voice calm and sure, not as a chain but as a compass. She looked back at the living world on the viewscreen, its future now secured. "Our cradle is a grave, and that is the lesson that will make us eternal." The Stargazer turned gracefully, its engines engaging with a low hum. There were other stars to visit, other whispers in the dark to answer. The ship moved on, its mission clear, its purpose forever forged in the silent ashes of a dead world.